Thanks so much. Good day, everyone. I know it's morning for some of you and afternoon for the rest of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Abra Lyons Warren. I'm the Director of Cross-Sector Initiatives at CLAFA. That's how we pronounce that acronym in case this is your first time joining us. This is the Housing Is Working Group. So all things cross-sector related. I know most of you have joined us before, but just in case, this is CLAFA's work to better align housing with other areas like education and health and all the good things that go with that. So as part of that, we have this working group, and what we aim to do is regular webinars and roundtables and update sessions. So this is actually the last one of this calendar year. Sorry, we work on sort of an academic schedule for the working group. So for the school year, so to speak. So stay tuned. In July or August, we'll be sending out more information about the webinars for the upcoming year. But we're so glad to have you with us today. Before we dive in, I wanted to just give a quick overview and summary of our Housing Is Summit, which took the place of a webinar last month. This is an annual event that we do every year to help celebrate and highlight and learn from each other about cross-sector collaborations and efforts. So I know some of you joining us were at the summit. It was so great to see you in person, and then some of you also were able to join us virtually as well. So this was kind of a return to normal, so to speak. We went for about 2 days, and we had really fantastic plenary sessions as well as breakout sessions following our normal pattern of our health and housing track, our education and housing track, and our partnerships track. So we were really pleased to be able to highlight income supports. This is something that we've covered before at past summits that we think is really important, both in terms of actual policies and practices happening, but also, really looking at the research behind that and what we're seeing its impact, particularly for assisted households. We also did another focus on maternal health equity. This is something that we're very committed to. We've been involved in the White House initiative around this. And we were really pleased to be able to highlight that again with a plenary session. And we also looked at a burgeoning partnership happening in Kansas City. I see Ed is on with us today. It's really a specific focus on literacy and early education for some of the youngest residents and members in Kansas City, but overall kind of this larger piece of what makes a partnership successful, how we can get it off the ground, sort of revisiting some of our roots there with this work that CLAFA supports. Breakouts were equally amazing and impressive, a focus on digital equity, on supporting residents who have previous incarcerations, community health workers. So really tons of exciting and great topics. I am pleased to announce that by the end of next week, we will have all of the recordings for the summit available to the broader public. If you attended the summit, you already have access to that. But for the rest of you, if you want to be able to catch any of those plenaries or keynotes or breakout sessions, we will have them uploaded and available on our clearinghouse website, which is housingis.org. And we can drop that in the chat in a little bit, but you'll be able to find all of that there in the next week. So really pleased. And if you are going to be at the CLAFA summer meeting next week, then we will see you in person there as well. And I think that's mostly all I wanted to say about the summit, but always welcome to more feedback. We really appreciate those of you who came and filled out evaluations. We took those notes, and it was really great to hear what you thought went really well and what maybe we can look at doing differently in the future. So if you have further thoughts, please be in touch with us. I'll turn it over to our presenters in just a moment, but I do want to just housekeeping wise, again, this is being recorded. So we will make this recording available. Usually Zoom sends it back to us pretty quickly, so we should be able to have it up tomorrow. I know a couple of you who are not here now because you told me you can't join, but we'll hear it during the recording, asked for the recording to be available. So if you want to share it with your colleagues or revisit it at any time, it will also live on housingiz.org under the resources section. So that will be up by the end of this week. And if you have questions at any time throughout this webinar, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Otherwise, know that we are leaving time at the end for Q&A. We do have a fair amount of you joining us today, but we can try and see if we can do it with folks unmuting themselves and asking questions verbally. But you can always feel free to put questions in the chat as well. And you can do that at any point. Just know that we might not start answering them closer till the end of the presentation. So I think with that, I'm going to let Camille introduce herself quickly. And then I do want to just point out she may be staying off camera, which is totally fine. But for those of you who you might have met her at the summit, she was there day 2, but otherwise we have not had a formal introduction. So pleased that Karina George is joining us this summer as the Housing Is intern. So she will be at the CLAFA summer meeting next week. If you're going to be there, you can meet her in person. And otherwise know that exciting things for us to come this summer include a comprehensive survey on activities that you all are participating in related to cross-sector work, and Karina will be heading up that effort. So if you don't respond to the survey on your own, Karina will be the one contacting you to urge you to fill out that information and to help you get that information over to us. So we're very, very pleased and excited to have her with us, and know that all of you join us in welcoming her. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Camille just to say hi for those of you who might not know her. And then we will be hearing from the Housing Authority of the City of Austin, talking about the very important topic of program sustainability. Camille?
Great. Yeah, so just a brief hello, everyone. I am Camille Knoll. I'm the Health Policy Manager at CLAFA and part of the Housing Is team. I'm going to be helping run the Q&A kind of later in this webinar or meeting, whatever we want to call it. So I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to kick us off. And she's going to give us the unfortunate news that Andy isn't able to join us as well today. So Catherine's going to be leading up the conversation. So take it away, Catherine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me. And I heard just great things about the conference. Congratulations on that as well, Abra and Camille and the group as a whole. I'm really curious. I'd like to start by just getting an understanding of folks, maybe just for the first 5 minutes or so, what are some things you'd like to learn today? Just thinking, maybe just share a little bit about your agency and how you're, maybe where you're headed and what you'd like to hear about today.
Wonderful, Catherine. So if you want to jump off mute, feel free. You can also enter into the chat. Come on, brave folks.
Okay, I'm just seeing, I'm seeing Sharon Monroe. I'm seeing, I'm just looking at my screen, Richard Santangelo, Michelle Booth, Stephanie, and others. What are some things you're hoping that you're thinking about when you think about sustainability and funding?
Stephanie Spampinato, can I call on you?
You certainly can, and I apologize. I'm actually eating lunch while I'm doing this because I do.
No worries.
That's right.
I don't know. The first thing that came to mind when you said sustainability and funding is, I don't know why, capacity and opportunity. Those are the two words that came to mind, because pursuing funding opportunities, well, as we all know, it takes a lot of time and effort, and that fuels sustainability. That's all I have right now.
Awesome. I mean, that's a great start. Capacity and then pursuing funding opportunities, it does take a lot of time.
Mhm.
So there is this cyclicality, if we don't have enough resources, or when things happen, like a random winter storm or a pandemic, then those things get dropped and we end up in this situation where our funding cycle is really, it's up and down
Mm.
based on the amount of time that we have to invest in pursuing that funding.
Catherine, I wanted to let you know we have some answers coming in from the chat, which I can read to you.
I am seeing that. Sarah, are you available to share your comments?
Yes, yeah. So Seattle Housing Authority does have a lot of resident programs already, and we are looking to build out some more just in really the next couple years. So we're thinking about, for those and for ones we already have, how can we build and leverage partnerships with community organizations and other funding sources so that we can continue to offer the services, but not have to fund the entirety of the program past the pilot or the first few years through the lifetime. So again, looking at the sustainability of the funding.
Awesome. Okay, Aisha?
Hi. Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
So funding part, not as much what I work with, but I work more with the resident services, and we are just having issues really getting our residents to engage in the programs that we offer that are already funded. So I'm just hoping to kind of learn about best practices and ways to engage residents, especially those that are between that 18 and 24 age group. Hopefully we can capture them before they kind of get set into the I'm in housing and I don't want to leave mindset that we tend to find with some of our older residents.
Fantastic. Because that's a big part of sustainability, right? Is having them engaged so that we can show that these programs are meaningful, show that to other funders, but also ensuring that residents have a resource to go to. That's really a great question. Anybody else? Any last share? What's missing? I'm seeing, do you see anything, Camille, that's a little bit different?
Well, Richard mentioned that he is interested in kind of the nonprofit framework that you all are utilizing in Austin. So that's exciting to hear about.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you. Okay, so I'll give you a quick thank you for that input. That's really helpful, because I mean, these questions are just, they're the stuff that we think about all the time. And as many of you know, the Housing Authority of the City of Austin, Austin's one of the fastest growing cities in the US. And can you see my screen? Can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. So it is one of the fastest growing housing authorities in the US, but we're on the small end, right, of the large public housers. So we house about 5,500 people in our traditional public subsidized housing. We're a RAD agency now completely, and we have about 6,500 housing choice vouchers. So about 22,000 people every night in Austin benefit from HACA. Our housing spans from far north in Austin to far south. Austin's a very north-south city across this crescent, which is sometimes called the crescent of poverty. Some folks call it the crescent of opportunity. And this is really a strategic advantage to us, when we're thinking about funding and sustainability. And I'll explain a little bit more about that shortly. Why that is. Austin is growing rapidly. We're not flat or low growth or in decline. We're growing about 8% per year over year for the last 20 years. So what that means is that in this central downtown area here, and even now spanning up a little toward north and south, there's lots of gentrification. So those social services that our residents would depend upon, like from maybe the clinic across the street or even the school across the street, those clinics and social service agencies are being priced out, and they're moving away from this gentrifying area downtown. And even some of the schools are starting to close because they're moving away. So that's another dynamic that really influences, how we think about sustainability. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive right now just on digital inclusion and share a couple of partnerships we have, and then circle back to these questions that you're asking. So this map was actually created in 2015 around our digital inclusion initiative, which I know many of you are familiar with, called Unlocking the Connection. And, you know, at that time, Google Fiber was new in its as a company and had already selected Kansas City as the first Google Fiber city. And there was a second city to be selected. Austin was chosen. And so as a part of Google Fiber launching in Austin, in short, Sylvia Blanco, who's our chief operating officer, began working with the city of Austin and others, and eventually secured an agreement from Google Fiber to connect every single public housing household with a free, very high speed, you know, fiber internet connection. And that's now a 1,000 meg connection. Now, Google Fiber hasn't moved all the way across the city, hasn't constructed across the city yet, but we are now about 70% of the way to our goal. That means though there is still a big divide across this crescent where our north properties, those north properties are not connected. And these middle kind of middle and south properties are connected. And that greatly influences how we do our work. So I'm going to show you now, you know, this digital inclusion initiative. So what you're seeing now, these are just our top line, you know, goals. And this comes from 2019. Now about 70% of our residents have free in-home internet, up from 4% in 2014. You know, it's right now it's about 60% of households. About 75% of our residents have earned a device, a refurbished device that has been donated by a third party, donated and refurbished through a partnership with Austin Community College IT interns. And of course, residents, about 10 to 15% of our family property households are moving every year. So, I mean, we're constantly having to replenish to ensure those residents have those devices in their home that they can use to access all kinds of services. We provide technical support and other things for those folks. But really about, you know, midway through our digital equity initiative, we started to think about, you know, what are those systemic barriers that we just need to eliminate? How can we use digital tools to do that? So we established an initiative called Smart Work, Learn, Play. And the smart part is just, you're using a device. Is it enabling you to get to school? Is it eliminating the transportation barrier, and how? Like, could I get you that bus pass faster? Or could you chart out or even track that bus that your kid is on that makes you feel that much safer for them to take the bus? Or can you unlock that e-bike that, you know, is only a $5 per year membership? Could you be banked in order to use an Uber or a Lyft voucher, which you would have to be banked for most of the time? Could you make that doctor appointment so that you can stay in care, even though you can't get to that visit? So we started thinking about, okay, childcare, transportation, how do we resolve that barrier? And really the key, you know, the key to Smart Work, Learn, Play is, from a funding perspective, it is a fund that has been set up to encourage folks who have any equity in any one of those issues to provide funding to us. The program is a consistent program that we operate through our not-for-profit subsidiary called Austin Pathways. And getting to that sustainability and that capacity and ability to pursue funding opportunities, but also ability to manage those grants when they come in. With Smart Work, Learn, Play Fund, there's just a quarterly report, and every funder gets the same report. And so we try to minimize the cost of reporting to those funders with, you know, by providing just, here, you're going to get a standard report. Now, some funders will say, you know, we want to add this thing, and then we might add additional funding for that because it costs money to report. So those are some elements of the funding perspective. Now, from the sustainability perspective, the key to all this is our mobility ambassador in this work, or ambassadors that are residents. Those residents are hired using a HUD, you know, approved stipend, a volunteer service stipend of up to $200. And of course, that volunteer service stipend is often for, you know, you're going to be a hall monitor or help distribute newsletters or sweep the hallways, that kind of thing. We've sort of repurposed that and said, okay, if you're going to be an ambassador, you're going to learn about our funder. You know, you're going to learn about how to use various tools. You're going to communicate about those with neighbors. You're going to help troubleshoot, and you're going to provide information back to us that we can provide to those funders. And so that ambassador program is really the heart of sustainability. It's the heart of engagement for not only for our residents, but also for our funders, because those ambassadors are often meeting with funders to share, you know, what's the benefit of that funding. So I'm going to just digress here. I'm going to just share a couple of quick examples and then come back to kind of the meat and potatoes of the funding options. So there's basically, you know, three kinds of funding. We run about just under $1 million in our digital inclusion initiative every year, and Austin Pathways, our nonprofit subsidiary, runs just under 4 million. And about 30% of that is provided by another not-for-profit subsidiary at the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. So it is a real estate investment nonprofit of HACA, and the proceeds from that help subsidize the you know, traditional brick and mortar side of the business. So from external funding, we're talking between 2 and 3 million each year, just to give you a sense of what that is. And when we became a RAD agency, you know, a lot changed. Before RAD, 80% of our funding was from one funder. It was HUD, and we knew how to go after that funding. We knew how to deliver, you know, to perform to that funding. And when we were no longer eligible for a lot of that ROS and other FSS funding through HUD, you know, we had a big transition. Currently, we have about 14 funders that are funding 80% of our revenue. So before we had one funder funding 80% of our revenue. So it's like, I have to manage this one relationship and do a really good job at that. And that's going to make me sustainable. And now I'm over here, I have 14 customers that are funding 80% of our revenue. So our goal now, you know, as a nonprofit subsidiary is to have probably 4 to 5 funders that are providing 60% of our revenue. And we want to be on a 2 to 3 year cycle with those funders. So that's our goal. And so it changes, you know, what kinds of opportunities can we go after? And what kinds of programming are so aligned with our mission and our values and our existing government funding that also overlap with those funders funding that we can continue to deliver for 2 to 3 years. And not only are we helping those residents, but we're also helping HACA. So for example, if we continue deploying digital equity tools and residents continue learning how to, you know, create accounts, well, then can those residents, will they adopt our work order system? Will they be able to pay their rent online? Is there a digital transformation opportunity for the housing side of, you know, of the business that gives us that extra benefit of those residents adopting those tools? So there's 3 basic kinds of fundings. There's the nonprofit kind of funding, foundation funding, like KDK Harmon Foundation or our city's GTOPS or ECG Foundation. Next Century Cities is a C3 that has a funding mechanism. The Transit Empowerment Fund is a local fund that the Transit Authority and some other transportation entities invest in. And then there are some private foundations that provide funding, privately held foundations. There's also corporate funding. There's 2 kinds of corporate funding. One is some companies have a foundation. So Dell Corporation, which is Fortune 50, they also have a corporate foundation, which is called Dell Foundation. So those are 2 different entities. And some companies, for example, Indeed, which is the jobs company, until last year, they did not have a corporate social responsibility group. They didn't have a corporate funding group. So the gifts that we received from Indeed those were received through other means, through memorandum of understanding. They did not have a grant making capacity, which they do now. And then finally, there's gifts in kind. And just for example, Austin Community College, we receive, about 300 or 400 devices from ACC every year. Those are would otherwise go to recycling that we get. We might receive training from Dropbox, for example, training sessions for HACA residents, for HACA ambassadors, actually. It might take the form of evaluation services, like from American Institutes for Research, or, pro bono West Point Society provides, and the Military Academy provide training. And that actually was something that we found out about through HUD. So there's 3 distinct types of funding. And so the challenge is to figure out if I'm really going for the 4 or 5 funders that are giving me 60% of our revenue on a 2 to 3 year cycle. What is the right, who's our target? And are there additional targets that, might want to invest with that individual or that funder, if they knew it was going to be a 2 or 3 year cycle on that funding? So a couple of quick examples. There are homes, this is at our Shadow Bend apartments. You don't see Armando Baladez in the picture here, but you can see Mondo, his name over the lion. He agreed to be an energy ambassador. So these are HACA residents who are paid that volunteer services stipend to learn about energy efficiency and how to use their internet connection to save money on their light bill. And in Austin Energy has a program called Demand Response. And if you have internet at home, you can register with Austin Energy and say, I'm going to get a smart thermostat, and I'm going to agree that when our energy usage is really high and really expensive for the city, that I'm going to agree that you can, turn down my internet or my temperature, or turn it up depending on which way it goes, a couple degrees. And that's going to save the city money overall. And when I register for that, I get $150, just for participating in the program. And then I'm going to save 2 or 3% a year on my utility bill. And so there were residents at some of our properties that really wanted nothing to do with the internet. I don't want it, have no need for it, but they did want to save money on their light bill. So we went to Nest and secured 100 thermostats from Nest to try this experiment with the support of Austin Energy, which is a department of the city. And then our ambassadors and maintenance staff were trained on how to install these Nest thermostats so that residents could use them. And one of the unexpected participants in this program was an organization that provides caregiving services. So we weren't expecting somebody who delivers meals to be really interested in this. But what we learned is that there are some residents who are mostly bedridden. And sometimes they called their caregivers to say, can you come to my house and change the thermostat? Can you put it up a few degrees or down a few degrees? And with this Nest thermostat, the caregiver was able to do that remotely, even for residents who weren't able to adopt and do that remotely. So this is a collaboration of Austin Energy, Nest, which has since been acquired by Google, using the Google Fiber connection that we had already secured, for residents, and the funds that enabled these residents, us to pay the resident stipends and to pay some of the staff time were from Austin Energy. They had a vested interest in making sure that there's higher adoption of demand response in services in their, in Austin. Now there's a different set of work, this is about mobility equity, which is about making sure that residents can use all kinds of transportation options to plan smart trips and wisely use Cat Metro and other services. And this is one of our residents, Pam Newsom on the left, who has provided a stipend with Kendra Garrett, who was an LBJ school student. And basically, this is just called participatory GIS. They just started to identify on maps where residents go for things like a flu shot, and how much it costs them to get there. So the folks who are really interested in this included a variety of transportation partners, included our central health, which was sometimes providing mobility services, or medical transportation for our residents, and the LBJ school, some other policymakers were really interested in this work. And so the mobility ambassador work engaged folks in doing that. And I'm just going to switch really quickly and show you, this included things like a transit adventure. Transit adventures were provided by Cap Metro, and they were basically residents who were ambassadors were trained how to do this. They were provided with smartphones, and they were trained to actually navigate a trip in real time, go together and have lunch, and then they would go back and teach other residents how to do it and conduct transit adventures themselves. The data that was provided by residents about the trips that they take was plotted on these maps, these GIS tools, by LBJ school students, and provided to policymakers like Ann Kitchen, who's one of our council members. And so this kind of data is really, the initial thought about how do you use this is just to find out, like, where do people need transportation assistance? What are the trips they need assistance for? Can we timely provide those? And then, but ultimately how it ends up being used is as a civic engagement platform. Ultimately, funders like Lyft came to us after seeing this data and said, we need to hire residents. We're having trouble hiring residents at all of our Lyft stations just to pick up the Lyft scooters and put them, and charge them and put them back in the stations. And it's a $15 an hour job. And can you guys help us recruit? And ultimately, that's an example of something where we had a 1-year agreement with Lyft, $19,500. It paid for some staff time. It paid for digital ambassadors or mobility ambassadors to help teach people how to use these tools and advocate for change in their neighborhoods. So that's just a kind of a quick share. And just to give you that sense of who might be interested, how might they be interested? And I think I'll just stop there and ask if there are any questions about the information I've shared so far.
Catherine, this was such great information. I have so many questions and thoughts swirling in my head. I am going to encourage anybody who might want to chip in to come off of mute, or you can put something in the chat.
And I'm seeing something, I'm just seeing a quick question that I can start answering. I'm seeing a question from Michael Strom. So it says, how can we make sure that a pilot has the potential to become a longstanding program if successful? I love that. I love that question. And I think it's, corporate funders, they may be interested in, what are the assets we have as housers for a corporate funder? One of the assets that we have is, we can provide place-based services. We may have a deeper understanding of the needs of residents than the average, not-for-profit, than even a United Way, who doesn't always provide place-based services. We have trust with residents. We have governance, mechanisms that are in place. We have resident councils, and resident councils are a kind of a repeatable vehicle for resident engagement. And I know it depends on when and which properties, but in general, that's an asset that we have. We have infrastructure. We're not always on city land. So we might have the opportunity to put a kiosk or something on our property that the city may not have an ordinance to put on. We have towers. Our buildings have, heights, which can be useful sometimes to various kinds of internet service providers or utilities. So I think some funders that are not federal, agency funders, where the framework isn't necessarily family self-sufficiency or quality of life, the investment they're interested in is about awareness. I want, the most vulnerable, low-income folks to be aware of this product or service. And when you look, when you ask, well, how are you going to measure this? Are they going to measure it annually? Is it going to happen over a couple of years? Or are they going to measure it quarterly? I think, first is understanding their measures and how long this investment's going to last. If it's something like recruiting or branding or program awareness, it's likely it's going to be 2 to 3 quarters that they're thinking, I'm going to invest in this for 2 to 3 quarters in this awareness campaign, and then it's going to be done. Somebody who's interested in recruiting, they probably have a budget over 1 to 2 years. I want to recruit, I want to recruit from the workforce that lives in these parts of the city, or that lives near where where my product or service is. That might be 1 to 2 years. If it's adoption, it might be a 2 to 3 year cycle. If it's a change effort, it's probably 3 to 5 years. So I think one of the first things is to make sure the pilot is not just a pilot. And it's hard to do that sometimes when a funder says, we just want to try this for 3 months. Well, it's a big investment of our time, right? Of our work and our resident support services staff, property staff. We need to make sure that, hey, this pilot is the first step in a 1 year or 2 year cycle. What I try to write into agreements or encourage, folks to think about is, if you're not funded beyond a pilot, who are you working with that has an interest in it? It is funded beyond a pilot. And they might say, oh, well, it's, the person that got the contract with the city to do this, they're funded beyond the pilot. They're funded for a year or 2. And then let's bring them to the table, because ultimately we need an agreement that goes well beyond the pilot. That's just a great question. Unless an organization is willing to, provide quarter time staff, at the property, office hours every day, that kind of thing, I'm not a big fan of a one-off pilot. Another way around that is to if possible, to establish, say, relationships with local corporate and private foundations, and make it like a friends of the housing authority, and say, we want to meet with you a couple times a year. We want to share with you, where our direction is, and we want to get your sense of where your funding direction is. That's all it is. We're not asking for money right now. We just want to see if when there's alignment. You're asking for maybe an hour or 2 of folks' time twice a year. And then that's a good place to bring up these, that we've been approached by United Healthcare to pilot an on-site, clinic at our senior properties for 16 weeks, and they're being funded by Robert Wood Johnson or somebody else. We don't have funding beyond this pilot. Is this a direction y'all are headed in? Is there value to you in learning from this pilot? And you may have a local foundation that says, yeah, if you evaluate this, I'll give you $20,000 to have an evaluation of the pilot. The data is going to belong to us. And, United Healthcare is going to, be able to pilot whatever they're piloting. And will the residents benefit? Obviously, that's the big test. But that might be another way to say, I have somebody who's not going to immediately fund this, but they'll fund some piece of this because it's in their strategic plan. It's in the direction they're going. And knowing that, I have a future meeting date where we're going to reevaluate and re-up, renew the funding. I'm just reading the chat briefly. What other questions are popping up? I see one from Dolores Adams from Portsmouth. Can you share a little bit more about your question?
Hi.
Hi.
My question, Kate, was one of the ones that was put in the chat at the very beginning when you asked what is that we hope to learn. And you've covered talking about getting funding outside of HUD so that you can diversify and help sustain your program.
Do you have a sample of a program that you're thinking of?
Well, we have, I'm just looking at all of our resident services programming for our youth, as well as our seniors. We've been working with digital literacy with all of our residents. We are also looking at trying to do some workforce development with our youth as well as the adult members to help prepare them for those, especially those that don't want to go to college. They want to enter the workforce. So we work with our workforce development agent, the WIOA agent, our regional WIOA agency. They have a program geared towards the youth, that the out of school youth, they call it. And but we are looking to, we have a FSS foundation that we set up. And so because we want to seek funding from other sources.
And it's just tricky too, right? Because your workforce development, is it a nonprofit or is it a division of the state?
No, the workforce development that we're working with is not just division. It is they're the federal WIOA agency, so they get this federal funding, and so they're one of our partners. So we work with them for their adult population and their youth population programs.
Yeah, and sometimes it turns out that, when you start thinking about, okay, who in the corporate sector, who in the foundation sector, or in the nonprofit center, who has an interest in this, who is already funded to achieve this goal, that may be struggling to achieve this goal or can't achieve it quite the way we can. And it gets interesting, right? Because sometimes your local nonprofit. So for example, our local Goodwill, sometimes the funder that's funding Goodwill, when we reach out to that funder, we're kind of competing with Goodwill. Boys and Girls Club, we contract with Boys and Girls Club. We actually contract with Boys and Girls Club. We have, clubs at 3 properties. And sometimes we are, going after competing with Boys and Girls Club for a particular kind of thing that we want to do. That's kind of right in our sweet spot. So I think, it's very delicate, but the challenge would be to find out from that ecosystem, what are the ways that you're really challenged to achieve your goals, things you're already funded for. If you can kind of work with them to figure out where are you really struggling, and are there unique assets that we have as a houser that can really support that little niche, right, in that resident services continuum.
I think our biggest challenge has been, especially with working with local foundations and funders, has been when they see the housing authority, they think we're a multi-million-dollar entity. So why are you coming to us for funding? They don't realize we're talking about one particular department of the housing authority that does not have anything to do with the other funding that comes into the authority. And that's been a major challenge, because they always want the budget and they want to look at your agency budget. And when they look at the housing authority budget, and you're like, wait a minute. So we have on some applications just put the budget of that particular department to show what we're working with for the funding for that department, not the housing authority as a whole.
Yeah, so is that FSS Foundation is that a separate entity? Is that a 501c3?
It is. We have gotten that set up as a 501c3 now, but I was talking about previously, that's one reason we set up the FSS Foundation, because when we were applying for funding as just the Housing Authority Resident Services Department, we were running into those roadblocks.
Right, right. So it is really tricky. I can just share, I mean, this is a very complex issue, and I'm sure there are people on this call that know a lot about how to navigate the conversation about why is my federally funded local housing authority asking me for more money. Yeah, but for me, what I try to do is just clearly differentiate between, I'll call it the brick and mortar side of the house, and that we're focused on. So those are measures that we have, and highlight the metrics that the brick and mortar side of the house has that benefits the community at large. Like, when people get into housing, they can get stabilized. When they're stabilized, when they know their rent is stable, they can, they can have the confidence and the courage to say, I'm not going to work a second shift. I'm going to get a degree. I'm going to get my GED. I'm going to get an associate's degree. When they have that confidence. And that's the benefit that stable rent provides, the brick and mortar side. And then I might just, transition and say, now in terms of resident services, in terms of making sure those residents can take advantage of all those opportunities, that's a separate part of our agency, and that's in our nonprofit called Austin Pathways. And then just, I think emphasizing the demographics, and what our goal is. I think funders need to know what is missing in you achieving your goal that they're going to catalyze that change. So the only thing missing is that it costs $135 for a GED test and it can only be taken online. So I need, 100 people to be able to take a $135 test, and I need 100 computers with internet connection so that they can take that test. So I think you're really showing that that the second challenge is to let funders understand there's a continuum, there's a housing continuum, and show them where they're putting in that continuum. There's homeless, some people are homeless. Our residents, were they not housed, they could likely be homeless. When residents achieve an education and get the medical support they need and know how to get their medication delivered, those that can leave housing, they will move into affordable housing, and that'll provide a place for the next family. I think a lot of the case that I make is that a funder who's funding resident services, they're decreasing the amount of time that family is in housing. They're shortening the amount of time they're in housing, and that provides a place for the next family, but it also provides a work-able adult with XYZ skill. That adult that has that GED that can go work at, these factories in my city, or these, things in my city. And so it is a challenge, but I think another important fact to provide at the beginning of a conversation when we're talking about the brick and mortar side is the age of the housing. The fact that HUD funding has been decreasing year over year, every year for how many years? The fact that what is the cost of being a high performing housing authority? And that, HUD's mission is safe, decent, affordable housing. And then we go to the people inside the homes. And I think that making that transition is really important. Being able to say who is served and who is unserved. That, I got a question from a 6-figure grant. It would have been a 2-year grant. So it's moving toward our goal. $350,000 for 2 years for 2 senior properties. And the question that came back to provide digital health equity and service coordination at 2 senior vulnerable properties. The question came back from the foundation's board. HACA seniors are relatively affluent compared to seniors in other counties. And but it's like, okay, if you go to Bastrop and Hayes and you're kind of in a rural area, maybe that's kind of true. Those are smaller housing authorities, et cetera. But we have to be prepared to make the case that all of our seniors and almost all of them are still unserved or underserved. There's not enough. So we have to be prepared to make that. I know the time is running short. I see Leslie Whiting has something. Do you want to share that, Leslie, real quick? That point.
Hi, everyone. So my background is in working for HHS before I came to the Housing Authority, and where I'm used to funding other nonprofits and thinking about how they partner with other organizations. So say like I worked for the Community Health Center program. We won't fund a housing authority to have that, but what we can do is fund a health center to place a site within the housing community. So just thinking more about if they won't give us the money, let's partner with the people who they will give the money to. And it's about us being able to get the services, not that we actually have to be the one to hold the dollars. But also I appreciate everything you shared, Catherine. I'm learning a lot here. Thank you.
Oh, great. I think, and I saw your comment about relationships as well. We're all bandwidth constrained, and but I think a simple first step is to maybe reach out, to 2 or 3 CEOs, local CEOs. If it's corporate 1000 where the CEO is in a different city, then reach out to your local GM and just say, executive to executive, I'm really learning more about public-private philanthropic partnerships. I wonder if you would be willing to meet with me a couple of times this year to share your perspective on corporate social responsibility and, vulnerable folks in public and affordable housing. Would you be willing? These are 1 hour. I mean, you're just trying to get their perspective on where they think things are going. The very first, to find that alignment where their roadmap aligns with your roadmap, long-term roadmap, we need to understand what is their roadmap. And as your conversations progress, you can ask maybe more sensitive questions, like where are the places you're finding it difficult to get a return on investment for your funding? Where are you struggling with some of your regular investments? These are what I see as my assets. Are these things that you all see as assets? How could these assets benefit you in ways that maybe neither of us are expecting? You can start to get a little more sensitive, right, as you go on. And as a very low cost initial investment, you may find yourself by the second or third call getting a referral, or anytime somebody will contact you, I know somebody who's trying to solve a problem, and maybe you can help. Now, of course, you're going to have to balance like solving that problem that they want to achieve their goal. We want to achieve our goals, ensuring that residents are served, that residents are respected, that this is beneficial, that it's, ethical, what we're doing. But that's the beginning, is just understanding what are our shared goals, what are assets we each have that the other one doesn't have, and then kind of working through that. So we're at the beginning of our journey. We're not there yet with 14 funders funding 80% of our external revenue. That's too many. That's not a good for sustainability. We need to increase the gifts of some of those funders and ensure that our performance is going to directly impact their long-term roadmap. If that's true, then we're going to have a sustainable relationship into the future. And that's really the key thing. So I welcome you to add additional questions, and I could reply later, Camille, in writing if it's helpful. And I'm very eager to learn from y'all. I'd love to hear any experiences that you have. Be really grateful to hear what you're learning on the ground as well.
Thank you, Catherine. This was fantastic.
Really great.
Yes, and we're more than happy to forward along questions if anybody wants to send any last minute ones and whatnot. Abra, final comments?
No, just echoing, thank you so much for your time. Really, really great questions from folks. So as I mentioned, we did record today. So if you want to be able to re-listen to this or share with a colleague, that will be an option in the coming days. We'll send a note out. The final thing I will say is that, well, I see Catherine just dropped her email in the chat. So if you want to reach out to her, but if you are not receiving our emails, if you learned about this from, say, the CLAFA newsletter or the CLAFA member email, as opposed to the email that came from housingisatclafa.org, and you want to start getting emails about the working group, please send a note to myself or Camille or to Karina, so that we can make sure that you are added to it. Likewise, if you have a colleague who you would like to be added to the list, please have them send us their email as well. So I think with that, just again, thank you so much, Catherine, for your time, and also for sharing your contact information for everyone. Hopefully you aren't swamped with too many reach outs, but we do love all the peer learning that happens with this group. That's one of the goals, and one of the great things that we hear from all of you is so helpful. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to everybody soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks all.